Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. So I have a straightforward question for you. Are you healthy? Sounds like a simple question, but how in the world are we supposed to answer that in this day and age? In this sea of health information out there, how do we define healthy, and what simple metrics can we use to tell if we're hitting the mark? For those of us looking to be our best selves, we need to prioritize our health. And in order to do that, we need to know what we're aiming for in our quest to become healthy. Accordingly, the title of our session today is How to Tell If You're Healthy, the highest impact health metrics you need to know. Our expert guest today is Dr. Stephen Kopecky. He's a consultant and the chair of education in the Division of Preventative Cardiology at Mayo Clinic. He's a world-leading expert in heart health, longevity, and preventative cardiovascular disease. He's the author of Live Younger, Longer, 6 Steps to Prevent Heart Disease, Cancer, Alzheimer's, Diabetes, and more, which is an excellent, practical, no-nonsense guide to healthy longevity that I would recommend to all of our audience. If you haven't read it yet, go check it out. The 3 big questions that we have that we're going to answer today with Dr. Kopecky are, number 1, what qualifies a person as being healthy and what should we measure? Number 2, what are the most common distractors and metrics that take us away from focusing on what matters most? And then finally, we'll talk about some solutions. In our third section, the big question is, what are the simplest sustainable steps to improve the metrics that matter the most for our overall health? Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this discussion for you. I think it's going to be immensely helpful for our audience.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. So we always like to start with some definitions, and I'm wondering for you, as somebody who's been, dedicated your whole life to this, how do you define being healthy from a medical perspective? And maybe is there a scientific definition and maybe a more practical definition for people?
Yeah, it's a great question because, many people define being healthy as absence of disease. And that doesn't give the whole picture. For instance, we've talked and you've talked about lifespan versus healthspan. Lifespan is how many years we live, and healthspan is how many years we're healthy. We have the biggest difference in this country of any country on this planet, 12-year difference. We live the last 12 years of our life with disease. And so the healthspan means you're free from diabetes, free from cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, free from heart failure where your heart doesn't pump very well. You're free from cancer, free from emphysema or lung disease, and you haven't had a stroke and you're not demented. Well, that tells a story, but there's a lot more to it than that. So I would say that your health span is really not just the absence of the disease, but presence of health. So what is health? Well, to make it simple, I've tried to put it into a compass, north, south, east, and west. And because these have all the traits that help us ensure we don't get heart disease, live as long as we can without it. We don't get dementia as long as we can without it. Don't get cancers because they all have similar risk factors that lead to different types of disease. So what's the north, south, east, west? Well, north is the most important. It's nutrition, what we eat. It's now the number 1 cause of disease on this planet. About the year 2000, we went from a planet that had infection as the number 1 killer to then having chronic diseases as the number 1 killer.
In year 2000?
In the year 2000, just
That's
25
not that
years
long
ago. Not that long ago at all.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So nutrition, very important, what we eat. Exercise, the east is exercise. We have to be active physically, and we can talk about that more. The south has a few things in it. One is stress, and who hasn't been stressed since COVID, the last 5 years? We all have it. What about sleep? That's kind of the forgotten time that our bodies are supposed to rejuvenate, repair, restore, and we have to give our bodies healthy sleep, or they can't do those things. The next is spirits, meaning alcohol, very small amounts, and that's been shown, and then smoking. And social support. You need to have people that support you, that help you. And, you need to be able to have somebody that has your back. It's like the lemmings. When they're lemming, there's always one lemming looking around saying, is there a coyote coming to eat us? And he'll warn his friends. And then the final West is weight. Weight is extremely important. It wasn't until the GLP-1s came along that showed us that weight and obesity is really a risk factor for heart disease. It's a risk factor for atrial fibrillation, these irregular heartbeats that many of us get. And so we need to be able to keep our weight, controlled, and we can talk more what that may mean.
Oh, it's fantastic. I like that construct, the north, south, east, and west. It really sort of boils it down into the real high leverage topics, so to speak. I use that term a lot on here, and I think that's really what we need to focus on because it's easy to get distracted with all the gizmos and gadgets and things that are out there. But we really focus on these high leverage things. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got so interested in this sort of mission of Healthspan and longevity? Because it's a relatively new field. How has that evolved for you?
Yeah, it was interesting. In medical school, I had cancer, and it was my fourth year of medical school. I was off doing rotations in other places in other states, and I felt a lump, and an ultrasound showed, and I had to get it taken out. And I thought that's just a bump in the road. I'm going to still do my own thing. And my own thing included coming to Mayo, training, coming back here, going on staff, getting married, having 3 little kids, and then boom, cancer number 2, lung metastases.
Oh, no.
And our youngest was 2 years old, and our oldest was 7, a wife and kids. And I said, and my sister had just died of breast cancer at age 41. I said, I need to do all I can to prevent cancer. I was a treating cardiologist at the time, working in the cath lab, the intensive care unit, heart attacks, et cetera. And I started to look at the prevention side of things, which I didn't really know much about. And I realized that anything I do to prevent cancer, which is what I thought I was going to die from, also prevents coronary disease, also prevents dementia, which, we've all had that in our family in different levels. And I realized that anything I do to prevent one disease prevents another. And I also realized that what I'm going to die from, the odds are, is coronary disease, because that's the number one killer now in the world. And so instead of taking this approach where I would treat the disease once it's there, we know that 80% of the deaths we prevent in cardiology are by preventing the disease, not waiting for the disease to come, and then we treat it. Now, growing up in Texas, one of my personal heroes, Lyndon Baines Johnson, passed the Medicare Act in 1965. And at that time, the lifespan wasn't that much longer than that. And it's changed since then. 60 years later, our lifespan is a lot longer. And it was kind of designed to wait until you have a disease and treat it. And really, we need to think differently and say, let's prevent the disease. But prevention does not start in my office. It starts at the home, in the school, in the grocery store, in the pulpit, in the barbershop. That's what we got to do.
That's great. And I think you, in your definition of health, you kind of outlined some of the key strategies and areas we need to focus on. And I think you did a really good job of saying that it's not just the absence of disease, but it's sort of the presence of health. We talked about Healthspan. Overall, in our modern times, how are we doing at this? What percentage of us would meet your definition of being healthy?
Yeah. Well, if you look at diet alone, healthy diet, there's about 1% of American adults that eat a healthy diet. Our children, about 1/100th of 1% that eat a healthy diet. Now, you add in other things like healthy sleep, healthy exercise, healthy alcohol, healthy smoking, healthy weight, it really gets way less than 1% that have what we would all define as health. Now, we may have absence of disease, but the presence of health, as we've talked, is something a little different.
Those are some very sobering numbers.
It is, and it's hard. There's so many things coming at us now. Stress, we talked about, diet, the foods that we have. And the younger you are, the more ultra-processed foods you eat, which can get us into trouble.
Mm-hmm. So I think that can be really depressing when you look at those numbers, but it also tells me that we have a lot of room for improvement. And potentially, we've seen major gains in recent years on some folks who really focus on this. So I do think that there's potential, now that we understand these processes, have a bigger focus on prevention, that maybe we're going to be able to do that. And because of these sort of sobering numbers, I think that there are more and more people who are paying attention to their health, which is good. But there are also some people, obviously, who still think this is not important or is not a priority for them. So how do we reach and inspire the people who think that this doesn't apply to them or isn't a big factor in their overall quality of life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to call it the man thing. They actually have a name for it. It's a disease belief model, meaning that men, if they can ignore a problem like high blood pressure or smoking, they don't need to pay attention to it because it doesn't cause them disease. And if you don't believe something causes disease, you can just ignore it. And that's what we've come to become is a group of, we're a very high-risk country for disease, as we talked earlier, with our health span being much shorter than our lifespan. So we need to educate on what is health and how to achieve it easily, because it can be overwhelmingly hard. And it really has to be, like the nutrition, it's been shown one bite of eating, like instead of sausage, eat a bite of black beans. After 2 or 3 years, that lowers your risk of heart attack. 1 minute of relaxation will help you, mitigate your anxiety. 1 hour of sleep, and we just had a great experiment on sleep, which was the daylight savings time, where we spring forward and fall back. We got an extra hour. In the spring, when we lose an hour of sleep, the following Monday, heart attack rates go up 21%. If you're in front of a judge, you get a stiffer sentence. If you're driving on the highway, you have a higher risk of a wreck or something like that. So in the fall, when we gain an hour, it's not until Tuesday, and the heart attack rates do not go down as much as they went up. And so, when you and I trained, we would pride ourselves on, geez, I can stay up all night, and work the emergency room. Hey, yeah. I'm tough.
Yeah.
Well, that hour of sleep, just 1 hour of sleep makes a difference. What about 8 hours of not sleeping?
Right.
And that's why they have laws now that we can't do that.
Right. No wonder you and I are both endorsing some gray hair here and a little wear and tear. All right. So I do think it's important for people to understand that to get motivated to do it. But also I think on the flip side, we have a lot of people out there that are very interested and very motivated, and they want to know, they want to get better, they want to have the answers. But one of the problems is there's so much information out there, and we're constantly being sold, these new products and services and tests and everything else. We just can't make sense of it all. So I'm wondering, in your mind, can you run us through the list of sort of the primary markers and metrics and tests that people should really be paying attention to that are sort of the critical foundation of their overall health?
Yeah. And it, again, starts with the north, south, east, west, in nutrition. And there's some things we need to analyze, like our diet. How many fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains do we take in? Because that's what our species has been eating for hundreds of thousands of years. We couldn't go out and kill a deer for breakfast 100,000 years ago. We just couldn't do that. No refrigerators. We didn't have a lot of meat. So, more plant-based. Make sure you're getting 5 servings of fruits or vegetables a day. Probably a serving of whole grains 3 or 4 times a week. Some legumes, maybe a serving every day. It's got great protein in it, great fiber in it. The very inexpensive. So the nutrition's important. The exercise, really important. That falls in 3 domains. One is not being sedentary. We never sat in the cave all day long, playing video games. We got up, we had to survive. So you ought to get up at least every hour, if not every 30 minutes. Go call, instead of sending an email to a colleague, go walk down the hall and talk to them. Go to a bathroom 2 floors up, so you got to walk the stairs. Also, the second thing is being vigorously active for a few minutes a day at least. And the studies have shown that the interval activity where you go hard for, say, 30 seconds, rest or slow down, recover for 30 seconds, do that 3 times. That's 3 minutes a day, 21 minutes a week. It will lower your cardiovascular risk 35%.
Wow.
And if you say, wow, if I can do all that with just 21 minutes a week, I'm going to start running marathons, that'll only lower it another 15%. So just being vigorously active, which is much better for the same amount of calories expended than continuous exercise. So I'm not saying that walking is not good. 10,000 steps is not good. It is. But if you really want to fit it into your lifestyle. And who has 45 minutes to go to the gym 3 days a week? That's the recommendations. You want to fit it into your lifestyle, go do some intervals for 3 minutes, and then you can go ahead and do the other 1,000 things you have to do that day. But too many times it comes time to be active physically, and we say, I don't have time today, I'll do it tomorrow. And guess what comes tomorrow? You say, well, kick that can down the road. And so that's important. And then some light weights, not heavy weights. We don't want you to do like 15 reps with a curl or something of your arm, and the 15th rep is the last one you can do. It's so hard. You can do 15 more. Just do it to fatigue. That's what we didn't get to be where we are on this planet by being the strongest monkey in the forest. A little chimpanzee can throw me across the room, who's half my size. So those 3 domains of activity are important. The S's, the sleep. Really pay attention to the sleep. Make sure you're getting healthy sleep, which means you wake up refreshed. I tell people set an alarm on when to go to bed, not when to wake up. And then when you should wake up, naturally, and means you're ready to get up. Now, if you travel in different time zones, that's different, of course, but that's very important. And really, we should get 7. Some people need 7, some 8. Very few people need 6. If you're one of those, you're lucky. But you sleep what your body needs. And then the things like stress. And this is something that I used to say avoid stress, which is impossible.
Right.
Since COVID, all you can do is mitigate it, deal with it. And that means trying to have things that really can be like one bite of food makes a difference, 1 or 2 minutes of stress relaxation. Have some music that you enjoy. There are certain symphonies by Haydn and Chopin that can reduce seizures. And if they can reduce seizures, they can certainly, make my mind be a little more calm. So I play music in my office all day long that's classical, and whatever relaxes you. And find ways to take a few minutes to some people say it's meditation, some yoga, Pilates, whatever you want, prayer. The alpha waves, the theta waves on brain EEGs have been shown to be very similar when you relax yourself, and it can help you think clearer later on. The spirits, very small amounts of alcohol, anything more than that has been shown to be problematic for our health. Certainly any smoking, and now we're seeing a lot of people go to vaping, which is also not good. And so you have to avoid all the things you put in your body. And then finally, the weight. And the weight, it's BMI is not the perfect way to measure it because some people are very muscular. But I encourage people to just measure their waist, not their belt size, because their belt can be underneath, a big paunch, but your waist, and it should be well less than 40 inches in a man and 35 inches in a woman. And if you do have that you can pinch a lot of fat around your belly, that is very pro-inflammatory fat. It puts out chemicals that actually enhance the risk for heart disease, enhance the risk for diabetes, increase your risk for cancers, and because it's inflammation. And inflammation around our body, whether it's in our brain, in our heart, in our tissues, can cause a lot of problems. And we never had big paunches in the past. We never could afford that. We didn't have that ability. So you really need to pay attention to these things. And how do you do that? Well, I encourage some clinics to have a pink string and a blue string. The pink string is 35 inches. The blue is, 40. It'll fit. I really encourage people to, do some testing at home. And one thing is like there are different sleep tests you can, questionnaires like Stop Bang. It asks you about 6 or 8 questions about your sleep, and does your partner nudge you once in a while, and say, hey, roll over, you're making me, you're keeping me awake. Those things are important. There are some things you can do that are very important, like blood pressure. Blood pressure, the new guidelines are saying, and have been shown for 30 or 40 years, that a top number above 115 increases our risk for heart attack and stroke. We don't treat till you get to 130 millimeters of mercury because there are side effects of treatment. But, these new blood pressure cuffs and the new guidelines say have the patient get one of these blood pressure cuffs that are automatic, fit on their upper arm, measures it, Bluetooth to their phone, sends it to the medical record. You can ask your doctor, hey, do I need more help with this? And they're very accurate. And that's the reason they've kind of starting to take over in the guidelines because, and I tell people, check it 3 or 4 times a week at home, different times, not just first thing or last thing because it's always lower. Check it after something incredibly stressful, like you're crazy enough to watch the evening news. Yeah. Some of my patients have to take nitroglycerin, before that. The other thing is take it to work with you one day a month or so. Mm-hmm. Check it at home. Most people's blood pressure goes up at work. But if your blood pressure, you come home and it goes up, I'm not a marriage counselor, but I think you need to, pay attention to that.
Some things to work on.
Yeah, some things to work on. Because blood pressure, and you say, well, it's just a little bit high, doctor. I say, yeah, but your heart beats 100,000 times a day. So pick up this pen once, okay? Now pick it up another 99,000 times today, and you don't last very long. And the heart, it really takes a toll on the heart, higher pressures. Do some fitness tests. One of the things we do here a lot is ask patients how can they walk 2 flights of stairs quickly. And if without stopping or getting symptoms that are untoward, then that's a good sign. And you can go through a lot of non-cardiac surgeries if you can do 2 flights of stairs or walk 2 blocks quickly. And that's very important. Things like how strong you are, grip strength has been shown to be helpful to know about. There's all this talk now about push-ups and pull-ups, and that can be hard on people, especially pull-ups are tough on shoulders and push-ups. But there are some, I think the walking tests are really the best to do. A 6-minute walk can be done. How far can you walk in 6 minutes? Those can be very helpful. There's some apps you can get and online find out about oxygen consumption stress tests. There's nothing better than getting that in a lab that does treadmills that measures it, and we have one of the largest labs in the world, and I think one of the best. But you can do some surrogate markers for that too, and which is a cheap and easy way. It's kind of worth what you pay for it, but at least gives you an idea. And then, finally, there are other things that you can do, like testing that you can do, like you have to pay for, at the office, and those can be very helpful, but they have to be very focused. I think one thing is, fasting blood sugar. That can put us at risk. Especially for men, it's important to know if you have metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome is 5 different components. One is high blood sugar. One is, do you have a increased waist, waist circumference like we talked about. One is what's your blood pressure, if it's higher than 130/80. And then 2 are blood tests, and one is the triglycerides and one is the HDL. And the triglycerides you want below 150, and that goes up when we eat a lot of ultra-processed foods or don't exercise. And then the HDL, that we want that higher because it actually cleans out the arteries. And if you have a low HDL for a man, less than 40, or woman, less than 50, that's one of the components of metabolic syndrome. And the reason I mention metabolic syndrome is many men come to me and say, what's my A1C? That's the measure of the last 3 months of your blood sugar. I'll say, well, it's just below where we want it. It's not high. And they'll say, oh, God, thank goodness I don't have diabetes, so my risk is low. And I say, that's not true. If you have metabolic syndrome, which is a precursor to diabetes, your risk as a man is already very high. A woman, once she becomes diabetic, their risk goes up. But for a man, because men have big paunches, and that's very pro-inflammatory and can increase, your risk for disease. So those are tests that are worth paying for in the doctor's office. There's some things like CT scans for calcium. That can be helpful, but if you're real young, you haven't had time to show it yet. And if you're over, say, 60 as a man or 70 as a woman, almost everybody has it. The REST ECG, I think, is very helpful, electrocardiogram at Mayo, because we do a lot of artificial intelligence on it, analysis. It can give you your heart age versus your chronologic age. Mm-hmm. Mine, before I got chemo, was 1 year older, my heart age. And I said, I need to do something, for this. And I've changed my lifestyle over the last 30 years since I had cancer last. And now my heart age is 17 years younger than my chronologic age. Wow. And I did that one bite at a time, one step at a time, 1 minute of relaxation at a time, because that's all we can really achieve. I do think that liver, do a simple liver blood test, check your liver enzymes. That's helpful because as we gain weight, our liver gains weight, our tongue gains weight. Fatty tongue disease leads to sleep apnea because it obstructs. Fatty liver disease is becoming the number one cause for liver transplant in this country, just because we put too many calories in it and it gets full of fat. So blood tests can help with that, and that's very helpful. The liver test, the kidney test to make sure our kidneys are filtering the blood. It's called creatinine or glomerular filtration rate. How much blood does your kidneys filter per minute? And we want that high. We want our kidneys to be filtering a lot of blood. We want our creatinine, which is the waste product, to be very low. If that's starting to creep up because our blood pressure is high or we're way overweight or something like that, that can certainly add up. So there's some simple tests, and they're not cheap, but they're easy to do and very accurate and tell us a lot of information. And then finally, one thing, the genetic testing.
And can I ask you, before we get to that,
Yeah.
you mentioned a couple of the cholesterol tests with the triglycerides
Yeah.
and the HDL.
Yeah.
Are those part of a normal, when people say I'm getting my cholesterol checked,
Yeah.
are those included in a standard cholesterol check?
Yeah,
And
it's a lipid panel.
are there other elements that people should be looking at in that test? And now there are some more advanced ways of looking at lipids and with some genetic markers and things. So in addition to the lipid panel, are there other tests that people should be asking for?
Yeah, one thing that's been talked about is lipoprotein A, small case A. About 20% of people have an elevation of it in this country and probably in this planet. And it leads to early heart disease, and it's genetically passed on from generation to generation. So it's being recommended everybody get it checked once in their life. It's like eye color. You don't need to recheck it every year. But if it's high, you're at risk. And we'll have medicines coming out for it in the next couple of years that'll help it. So if you have a family history or something like that of early heart disease, it's worth getting it checked. There has been talk, suggestions, say, check an apolipoprotein B, ApoB. It's been shortened. And that can be helpful if you but it's not any more helpful really than an LDL cholesterol. And by that I mean that if your LDL is really high, everybody should be under 100 because the average LDL at the time of first heart attack is 105. But if you have 150, you don't need an ApoB to tell you it's too high, But we do check ApoBs when we get the LDL down to the level we want it to be, the goal range. And the goal range, if you have heart disease or have had a stroke or have had a stent or had a heart attack, is to get it down around 50 because that's where it is about when we're born. And we know when we get it down to about 50 LDL or ApoB less than 70, almost all the plaque that can regress, and when I say plaque, that's the narrowing in the arteries to the heart, almost all the plaque that can regress will regress. And when I say regress, I mean only lipid-rich plaque regresses. The calcified plaque is hard as a rock. It doesn't regress, but it also doesn't cause problems.
Okay. Great. That's an incredible battery of things. And what I love about that, though, is that most of those things, almost all of them, are simple at-home things that people can go and check now, today. And then even the blood test and the lab things that you're talking about, most of these are fairly basic tests that anybody can get with their primary care physician. And so these are not expensive send-off custom tests with, 500-600 results that people can do. And I think a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, that seems pretty simple. You're talking about changing one bite at a time or just measuring, these simple little things. But you already told us if you check all of these boxes, you're in the top 1% of 1% of health. Is that true?
Yeah, you really are. And plus lifestyle, how active are you? How do you eat? Things like that.
Right. Okay. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so you were starting to talk a little bit about genetics.
Yeah.
How much do our genetics determine this, and what do we need to be looking at in terms of genetic testing?
Yeah. If you look at our health, about 10% of it depends on our health care, because really our health care is you go to the hospital when you're sick. You don't go when you're healthy, About 20% of it is our environment. Do you pollution, things like that, how you're exposed to different factors. Maybe about a third of it is genetics, and about half of it is our lifestyle. And the genetics is really it's interesting because you remember about 20 years ago, they said we're going to map the human genome, but there's a lot of filler in between that we're not going to map. Well, the filler was kind of, I call them on and off switches, meaning it's the epigenetics, the around genetics. So if you have a healthy lifestyle, for instance, that turns on the good genes, the epigenetics, and it turns off the bad genes and vice versa. And so you can actually, this was studied, I think the most important studies were the people that had genetically high, super high cholesterol levels, an LDL of 250, not 100. And we know that their lifestyle, if it's a healthy lifestyle, can really lower their risk of heart attack tremendously. It doesn't lower their cholesterol, but it lowers their risk, probably because the epigenetics is playing a big role in turning off the bad genes and turning on the good genes. And so genetic testing, there's some that are really worth it. Obviously, the monogenetic things, like my sister died of breast cancer, look if they have the BRCA gene. The cholesterol, which is called familial hypercholesterolemia, there are certain tests for that. If you have really high cholesterol, that should be checked for. And third is Lynch's syndrome, which is multiple polyps in your colon, in your gut, that turn into cancer. And if there's family histories of any of those things, then you ought to be checked for that and see if you have the gene, because if you have the gene, we can do things to help you.
And that's generally based on either you have a family history or you have symptoms or things that are found on screening tests, or your other blood work suggests that something else is going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Well, that's an incredible list. And so we'll come back to a lot of these items when we get to the third section where we talk about how we can improve. But I love the fact that you said, we often worry that our genetics are dooming us, but you're saying, 50% or more of this comes down to lifestyle, which are the things that we can actually change, you having done so for yourself. So I'd like to get into our second section. We're going to talk a little bit about the things that distract us and take us away. So you talked about all sort of the high yield things that we really need to focus on. There's a lot of other stuff out there, though, that's getting a lot of attention. So how do we make sense of all this? When folks are pushing all these new tests, diet, procedures, technologies, and products kind of as the next big thing, how should we be approaching those technologies as consumers to try to make sense? Okay, which of these things do I need to use? What's helpful for me? What's hype? How do we go about that?
Yeah, it's very true, because Dr. Google has a lot of things on it. And and it's hard to discern. There's some basic rules. One is if it's too good to be true, guess what? It probably is. This one test can do it, and because it's human nature to want the one thing. And they'll say to me, a lot of patients will say, "Doctor, what's the one supplement I need to take? I heard it's, supplement X or Y." I'll say, there really isn't. I mean, think of your job. Was there one thing that you did in your job that really, made you? I mean, the guys win the Super Bowl not from one play. It's from the thousands of hours of work that went into planning for that one play. What about other things you can do? Is it like raising your kids? Was it just one thing you do with your kids on Saturday afternoon? Of course not. It was, hundreds of things throughout the week. Your marriage, anything. Everything it's a tiny, tiny steps. And this is the same way, just like saving for retirement. You don't buy a lottery ticket when you're 64 and a half and say, okay, I'm going to, you really try to do little things along the way. So make sure that you're focusing on the big picture, not the one supplement, the one medicine, the one exercise machine, the one, thing that will help you, and because it's probably not going to work. And so you really got to be careful with that. Also, if somebody is trying to sell you something, if you went to a store and they were trying to sell you something that you really didn't want, you'd say, I don't think I'm going to do that. But sometimes in medicine, without a lot of background, patients, they can easily succumb to a sales pitch, because they want, they really want to live forever. I mean, that's a noble goal. But so be careful with that. Be careful of the quick fix. You and your surgery background, that it's not just a single surgery. It's all the rehab before and after and everything else we do. And there are certain things that are really can be helpful, and I'm thinking about fish oil. There are certain fish oils that are helpful. We know that eating fish 3 or 4 times a week, a 3 or 4 5-ounce serving of oily fishes helps you. Well, it's kind of our nature in this country to find something that helps you, say we know the one thing in it that helps, we're going to desiccate it, put it in a little pill, and sell it to you for 10 times as much money. That's not really the way it is.
Right. So things that kind of happen in unnatural ways, so to speak, or packaged for you. Okay. So watch out for the quick fix, things that overpromise when somebody's trying to sell you something, or things that promise to be the one thing and the only thing that you need.
Yeah, and probably the last thing to add is if there's any diet that has a doctor's name on it, stay away from it.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. Great things to watch out for. What about wearable technologies? That's something that's growing immensely. And so now there's all sorts of forms of this. So it's not just watches and bands and rings. And I mean, now you can have things that you put on your mattress at night. And there's all sorts of things, which I think maybe have a role, can be really good, but also can be distracting. How do we make sense of that?
Yeah.
What do we need?
Yeah, well, we need to think back to the history of technology. And meaning that, just a quick look back, there are some great technology that we do not pay attention to. And one of them is called the bathroom scale, and one is called the bathroom mirror. And people ignore that. They'd rather have a $500 machine that weighs them and tells them how much body fat. Well, if you look down, you can't see your feet. There's probably something between there and your eyes, mainly your paunch. And so don't get technology if you're not going to pay attention to the answer. Number one. Number two is there's some technology that can really help you. The bathroom scale can help. These things that where they measure heart rate variability. I mean, that's a young thing. As you go through life, you lose your heart rate variability, but you don't need a fancy machine to do that. One way is when you breathe in. Does your heart heart rate slow and speed up as you breathe in and out? That's heart rate variability, and that's a good thing to have. It means you have a younger heart. Some other things you can do, measuring BMI isn't that helpful. Measuring waist is. The Apple Watch can be helpful in certain ways. But if you have irregular heartbeats that you want to diagnose, the Apple Watch kind of averages a beat, so it gives you an average. But there are some devices that'll be coming up that are actually available for about $100 that will measure a 6-beat electrocardiogram, 6-lead electrocardiogram that has pads. You put your fingers on, put it on your leg, and it actually gives you a 6-beat ECG that goes to your phone. You can download it, send it to your doctor.
Wow.
And it's really very accurate and very cheap to do. So some of those things are really helpful, but a lot of them you got to be careful. You mentioned sleep. That can be very helpful. But is it any more helpful than asking your partner the next morning, hey, did I snore so loud I woke you up and you had to nudge me? Did you wake up feeling kind of, God, like I never went to sleep? That tells you answers right there. So make sure that you're paying attention to the simple things. And then if you need more info, do the more exact. And even mattresses now they sell will measure your sleep and give you a sleep score, things like that. That can be helpful if you pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those things, too, where it can be helpful if you know why you're doing it, you know what the information is going to give you, if the information is accurate, and then you're not going to allow it, you're not going to become sort of obsessed or stressed about it, too. I see a lot of people that, and honestly, myself, I spent some time tracking my sleep. I woke up feeling great. I looked at my sleep score, and it was poor. And I thought, well, that's frustrating. I thought I nailed it. Why am I not getting the score that I want? But then I thought, but I actually feel really good. So should I, how do I handle that? Do I need to? And so I think you just have to recognize these things have their place. Ultimately, the goal is to be healthy and to feel good and to live a high quality life. And if you're doing that, you may not necessarily have to play the game, so to speak, of just getting your sleep number up. And vice versa. I think the opposite may be true for some people too.
Yeah, very true. It's like BMI. If you're a muscular person, it doesn't matter what your BMI is.
Right. Yeah, so know why you're looking at these things. Okay, great. All right, so now let's say, we do these things. And I think, too, is this safe to say a good approach for this is, all the things that you outlined for us in that first section, those are really where we should start. And I think if people do that and they optimize those things, first of all, congratulations, you're in the top 1% of 1% of healthy people, which is fantastic. then there might be a role. If you reach that level, then there might be a role to layer on some of these more advanced metrics and tests and all that. But it's probably not worth messing with some of those things at the margin until you nail the basics first. Is that an appropriate approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's like going to first grade. You learn the alphabet. They don't say, okay, here, read the dictionary. You got to start somewhere and work up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. Let's say now that we do these tests, a lot of the at-home stuff that you talked to us about, some of the blood work that you mentioned to us, and we say some of our results are less than ideal. You talked about different factors, that affect our health care, our environment, our lifestyle, our genetics, obviously with lifestyle being the one that we can control the most. So let's say we do our test, our results are not great, and we want to start making some changes. We only have a few minutes, so I know you can't give us all the answers here, but suggestions or frameworks to think about for folks on how they go about making the changes they need to start improving some of these metrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, it depends on what the metric is. If you're having bad sleep, then that's probably weight may be involved, the fatty tongue disease that you obstructs when you sleep at night. You need to start working on weight. Talk to your provider about some of these drugs that may help lower your weight. But it's not just about the drug. It's also about the lifestyle. And for that, what I mean is ultra-processed foods. And that's something that I think everybody really needs to know what they're eating and what they're putting in their mouth. You wouldn't have a $40,000 car and put diesel in the gas engine. You'd say that's stupid. Well, don't put diesel, don't put the wrong fuel in your body. And so the ultra-processed foods are coming at us like crazy. The average American eats about 8 per day. The recommendation is 3 per week. Our kids are eating about 10 a day. And if the problem is that you gain more weight with the ultra-processed foods because you eat more of them. They don't sate you. They don't fill you as well. Now, it's very easy to eat an ultra-processed food because it's right there in front of you in the checkout line, or, you buy it very easily and gobble it down. But eating a fruit, a vegetable, legume, whole grain is much better for us. And we really need to work on that one bite at a time, because it's very hard to change diet quickly. And this oxymoron, break a bad habit, is exactly that, because your brain loves habits because it can do something else while you're doing a habit. So I tell people, take a habit that's not healthy, like eating a bunch of, really like you take off a big block of cheese and eat it. Cheese is wonderful. We live in one of the great cheese areas of the world here, in Minnesota, Wisconsin. But, slice the cheese thin, get an apple or a pear, put it on there. So you're getting your cheese, but you're also making that habit a little healthier with the fruit, something like that. The blood pressure, that's, if your blood pressure is a little high, start to analyze your sodium intake, because the more sodium you take in, the higher the pressure. We've all been to a diner where a salt shaker has rice grains in it, because the rice will absorb the fluid instead of the sodium, the salt absorbing the fluid. The more fluid in the pipe, the higher the pressure. So start analyzing that, and start analyzing how active are you physically. We know if you're more active physically, walking or doing intervals, you'll lower your blood pressure. If you sleep better, half of all people with sleep apnea have high blood pressure. Half the people with high blood pressure have sleep apnea, or inappropriate sleep. So we need to, all these things are connected. It's never in a vacuum, as we all are aware from our lives. So start to analyze the little things that lead to the things we want to change.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's excellent. One of the things we didn't talk about, so as we wrap up, kind of my final question for you, we didn't talk a lot about screens for cancers. We mentioned a few early on, but could we run through real quickly your recommendations for screening tests that people need? I'm thinking about things like colonoscopy and prostate and breast cancer, like that sort of thing. So what are some of the biggest impacts screens that people should be doing, and when?
Right. Well, if you're a young man, testicular cancer is one of the largest killers of young men. That's what I had in medical school. I felt a lump. And, I encourage young men to look for lumps, just like a woman in the shower were for breast lumps. Look for those. And if the mammogram is very good for women, there's schedules for that. Certainly if there's a history in the family of breast cancer, that needs to be done. The colonoscopy can be very helpful. We have a thing now that was developed at Mayo that we can actually look for the genetic material from cancers in the stool. and that can be done, non-invasively. And if you don't have a history of cancers in your colon, you can actually look for those, get that test and do it. Prostate is, the problem with prostate is if you live long enough, there's a good chance if you're a man, you may get it. And that just needs to be screened for with the prostate-specific antigen, and certainly report any symptoms. Men are really good about ignoring symptoms, and go to your doctor early and say, hey, I'm having trouble, urinating here, and they can look for different things that they can do. I think the other thing is be aware of your family history. We all know it's kind of maybe what our parents had, and maybe what our sisters had. Our brothers don't want to talk to us about it. They're not so good about it. But try to try to get a history of your family, what the cancers are in there, and let's start looking for those. And tell your provider, your doctor, and say, hey, my brother had this, my mother had that. What do I need to look for? Because a lot of it can be genetic, but a lot of cancers are lifestyle too.
Excellent. Well, you've given us a great framework, I think, to answer this question, are we healthy or not? That's sort of what I started this episode out with. And I think you've done a great job of defining health and then giving us metrics that we need to look at to be able to answer the question. So I'd like to recap. I've been taking notes as we talk. So first, I like your definition of being healthy. It's not just the absence of disease, but it is the presence of health. So we talk about Healthspan as sort of our time free from chronic disease, which we want to try to increase. We want to try to not just avoid disease, but introduce as much health as possible. I like your north, south, east, and west construct that you have. So north in nutrition, S for south stands for stress, sleep, spirits, smoking, and social connections, E for exercise, and W for weight. So think about that construct as you're trying to ask yourself, am I healthy or not? Sadly, less than 1% of 1% of us are really hitting the mark on all of these things. So there is a lot of room for improvement. But the good news is you can improve. And as you outlined, it takes really small steps, just improving, changing out one bite of something unhealthy for one bite of something healthy, and just moving as few as a minute or 30 seconds. So we ran through a bunch. You gave us some great tips on nutrition, what we should be doing with fruits, vegetables, legumes, lean meats. Exercise, we need to move more every hour. We need to have some vigorous activity, and it can be short little intervals that are up to 3 minutes a day, and then some form of weight training. For sleep, we need to wake up refreshed, make sure we're getting 7-8 hours of night, minimize our stress, and even a minute or two of relaxation every day, whether that's listening to music, sitting quiet, meditating, yoga, prayer, gratitude, whatever. Just find a way for 1 or 2 minutes to reduce stress, and then eliminate and minimize spirits, being alcohol, and smoking. And then for our weight, try to maintain a healthy weight. BMI doesn't always tell the full picture. Waist size can be incredibly helpful, and you gave us some metrics to shoot for there. At home test, we talked about sort of the stop, bang, sleep test, measuring your blood pressure, trying to get your systolic under 115, and some simple walking tests. Can you climb 2 flights of stairs easy? 2 blocks vigorously. How far can you go in 6 minutes? We talked about grip strength. There's some apps that you can do to look at home oxygen test and things. And then paid for tests, fasting blood sugar, ask if you have metabolic syndrome, lipid panel, maybe lipoprotein little a, maybe ApoB for certain types of folks, getting a cardiac scan with resting EKG, liver test, kidney test. All of these are things that your doctor can do for you pretty easily. So great battery of tests. Sounds simple, but if we do those things, we're going to put ourselves in the top 1% health-wise. And important to realize that over 50% of our health is determined by our lifestyle. So these are things that we have total control over, even if our genetics are not on our side. So that's my summary. I'm going to flip it to you now to give you a chance to summarize, and I'll ask our 3 big questions once again, let you kind of give rapid fire answers here. So
Yeah, that was a great summary. I really appreciate you putting all those things together. I mean, I obviously agree with all of them. There's a lot of science behind it. We didn't go into the science, the studies, et cetera, but it's there behind it. And it'll really help us in the long run, have the longest life, the healthiest life we can have, so we can all reach 100 and boom, just drop over one day.
I love it. That's right. And we're not talking about just living for a long time. We're talking about maximizing the quality of those years that we have, and then minimizing the amount of chronic disease we have at the end. All right. So our three big questions, we'll get your rapid fire answers here. Question number one was, what qualifies a person as being healthy, and what do we measure?
Yeah. Don't measure just the absence of disease. Measure what healthy habits you have, because habits really define ourselves, and just like it does in your job or your life or your marriage or your kids or anything else. So how you're eating is extremely important. How active are you physically? How you exercise? What your weight is, and specifically how much do you have around your middle, your paunch? What is how sleep, how much sleep are you getting? How healthy is it for you? How are you managing your stress? And everybody needs to pay attention to that and optimize their optimism, so to speak, because pessimism is the worst feeling, worst emotion on the heart. And you need to practice optimism every day. When I go to bed at night, I think of three things I'm happy for. That it could be simple things. Gee, I saw an old friend from high school, or my kid, hit a home run in Little League, something like that. After a couple of years, that's been shown to reduce your heart attack rate. Practicing optimism. And so these are little things you can do just a few seconds a day, and it really can add up big time.
That's fantastic. And what I love about that is these little things add up over time, and then they impact essentially every chronic disease. So all of those things, it's not just cancer, it reduces cancer risk, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, like all of the big ones. All right, our second big question, what are some of the most common distractors and metrics that take us away from focusing on what matters the most?
Yeah, try to focus on a lot of little things, not the one quick fix. There never is just one quick fix in anything in life that I know of, or very few things. So it's little things that you do every day, and but try to stay away from the supplements that are the newest and latest and greatest supplements. And I'd like to write a history of supplements in this country. And after about 5 years, most of them are shown to not be helpful, or about 10 or 15% are actually shown to be harmful. And it's kind of the Olympics analogy. That these things that enhance your performance, they don't allow it for a reason, and most of them because they don't work.
Yeah, no, great. And then our third, what are the simplest sustainable steps to improve the metrics that matter most for our overall health?
Yeah, try to focus on the really important things we've talked about. And remember, you cannot change them all at once. It has to be tiny little things, just like everything else in life. It's a series of little steps. And they really do add up and show benefit. And it's not just one thing. It's not just how you sleep. It's not just how you exercise. It's not just what you eat. They're all connected, and they really play into each other. So if you get bad sleep, you're eating worse and you're not being active physically, So all these things really are important. So try to focus on a little bit of each one every day or every week, certainly, just to improve it. And at the end of, a couple of years, you'll really be much better off.
So that's a perfect segue into our challenge to the audience. We always like to end with a challenge or an action step that we want them to take. And so there is going to be a temptation for some to say, okay, I'm going to write all this list out. I got to do all these things now and get it on order. And it doesn't work that way. So my challenge is to think about that construct that Stephen gave us with the north, south, east, and west. Pick one of the things on that list: nutrition, stress, sleep, reducing spirits, smoking, improving social, increasing exercise, or optimizing your weight. Pick one of those things, and then he gave us a bunch of different things you can do under each of those categories. Just pick one and start doing that. And then once you've developed that habit for over a week, then you can maybe start thinking about adding in the next thing in that category. So start very small, pick one thing, make some improvement. And again, we said it doesn't take a lot to actually make a meaningful change on your future risk and health. So start with that, keep growing. Stephen, thank you so much for joining. This is a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate you making this so practical. And I think this is really going to help our audience cut through a lot of confusion and misinformation that's out there.
Great. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Good. So to our audience, remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world, and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.